Across the world, alcohol consumption and harm are on the rise, and since the COVID-19 pandemic, deaths from alcohol rose to their highest level on record in the UK. Despite an abundance of evidence showing how to reduce alcohol consumption and harm, the alcohol industry has been a major barrier to progress and has slowed or prevented meaningful change. The alcohol industry has a profound effect on our health by influencing public policy to protect their financial interests. But how do they do this, and who are the key players within the alcohol industry?
The alcohol industry spends billions trying to prevent the implementation of effective alcohol policies that we know will reduce alcohol-related harms. And the reason they do this is because they fear that these policies will reduce profits. So the main ways in which they try to prevent these policies being implemented are extensive lobbying of governments, including the UK government, building relationships with policymakers, and funding scientific research to support policies that promote commercial rather than public health interests.
The alcohol industry is dominated by a group of multi-billion-pound companies. Over the past few decades, the industry has become increasingly consolidated, with far fewer companies accounting for an ever-increasing share of industry activity and revenue. The biggest companies globally are AB InBev, Diageo, Heineken, Molson Coors, Pernod Ricard, Carlsberg and Asahi. Their brands are well known, widely marketed and sold across the world, and include Stella Artois, Smirnoff, Amstel, Johnnie Walker, Kronenbourg and Campo Viejo. These predominantly European companies amass huge profits each year. For instance, in 2022, AB InBev made $6 billion in profit alone, Diageo £4.4 billion, Heineken £4.3 billion, Molson Coors $3.7 billion, Pernod Ricard £3 billion, and Carlsberg made £1.4 billion in profit. The global alcoholic drinks market is worth around $1.17 trillion in revenue. That's more than the GDP of 179 countries, meaning only 16 countries in the world have a higher GDP than the alcohol industry makes in revenue each year. These revenue and profits are at the expense of people's health.
So in England, 68% of alcohol industry revenue comes from people drinking above the Chief Medical Officer's guideline levels, and 23% comes from those drinking at extremely harmful levels. So a lot of the money that they make ultimately comes from those who are drinking at levels that are hazardous or harmful to their health. And in an analysis that we did, we calculated that if people were to stick to the guidelines, alcohol industry revenue would fall by about 2/5, 38% in all.
So the industry relies on consumption that damages people's health in order to make profit for shareholders, and, along with most private businesses, the alcohol industry's primary responsibility is to deliver these profits to shareholders. Alcohol industry growth and profit can come in three ways. 1. By encouraging people who already drink to drink more. This is often by marketing new occasions to drink. 2. By encouraging more people to drink. This often means targeting low and middle income countries and lower drinking parts of the population, such as women and young people. The latter referred to by one alcohol brand as the heavy using loyalists of tomorrow. And 3. By encouraging people to drink more expensive drinks, so-called premiumization, which is particularly done in Western markets due to higher levels of disposable income. The industry influences public policy, including health policy, in a number of creative ways, as part of their corporate strategies to protect profits. Of course, if Diageo or Heineken were to blatantly push an agenda implying that alcohol isn't harmful, they would likely find it difficult to convince people due to a clear conflict of interest. However, instead, they push their agenda and preferred narrative by setting up and funding both trade associations and SAPROs, or social aspects and public relations organisations. Trade associations are usually commercially focused on issues such as tax, marketing and regulation. Examples of trade bodies include the Scotch Whisky Association and the Wine and Spirit Trade Association. SAPROs have greater direct overlap with public health, as they focus on issues such as research, alcohol control policies, and underage drinking. Examples of SAPROs include the Portman Group and DrinkAware.
So SAPRO's social aspect public relations organisations or organisations which the alcohol industry funds, which take forward its preferred responsible drinking messages. So in fact, they're an important vehicle for putting that industry messaging out there. A big part of their activities, and that includes organisations like Drinkaware Ireland, Drinkwise in Australia, is to purportedly provide health information to the public on alcohol harms. So this is a big part of their mission. Unfortunately, again, the information that they provide to the public is misleading, partial, and is characterised by what's sometimes called strategic ambiguity. So you get a lot of mixed messages, but they would say that they have a strong educational focus as organisations, but in fact, when we've analysed the content of the materials, these educational materials that they use, including in schools, the material is deeply concerning. So the SAPROs themselves are also a vehicle for alcohol industry misinformation.
These groups, whether trade association or SAPRO, play down alcohol harm and minimise attention on alcohol in relation to public concerns, such as cancer or the cardiovascular harm of alcohol.
We've seen across organisations like Drinkaware, Drinkwise, Educalco in Quebec, and other organisations that they like to avoid, if possible, mentioning the risk of cancer. If they have to mention the risk of cancer, they will then claim that will point to the fact that there are lots of other things that cause cancer. So it's almost like diluting the information by saying, well, yeah, alcohol causes cancer, but look at all these other things. Genetics is a particularly common one, which they will point to, family risks. And the other aspect of misinformation is to avoid mentioning the risk of breast cancer. The alcohol industry particularly does not want consumers, particularly female consumers, to be well appraised of the risk of breast cancer.
One of the core framings of the alcohol industry relates to individual responsibility, in which they deflect attention away from their product and the harm it causes onto people's behaviour. By emphasising the importance of personal responsibility and individual judgment in consuming alcohol, the industry can say that their products aren't the problem. The problem is people not using them properly and drinking irresponsibly.
So this is a key part of the alcohol industry strategy, to deflect attention from the role and responsibility of the industry in creating harms onto the individual. So it's a necessary part of ensuring that any individual harms, individual level harms, are the responsibility for those are passed on to the consumer themselves. So that then leads to the emphasis in alcohol industry messaging on drink responsibly and responsible drinking and so on. So it ensures very much that there is a deflection from the responsibility of the industry, which is where our attention should be, onto the responsibility of individuals.
Yet the industry never clarifies what responsible drinking even means, and this binary outlook of the sensible majority versus the problem minority is damaging and stigmatising. Alcohol is an addictive and health-damaging product, and there is no safe level of consumption. To suggest there is a sensible drinking majority implies there is a safe level. To suggest there is a problem minority implies alcohol isn't an addictive substance that has been normalised in most societies across the world. Yet the industry continues to use this responsibility tactic to resist broader structural population-based measures such as raising alcohol taxes or restricting marketing. These measures have been shown to be much more effective in reducing harmful drinking. Another key tactic the industry uses in order to resist more effective measures, particularly trade associations, is to position the industry as being good for the economy. When minimum unit pricing was set to be introduced in Scotland from 2012, the Scotch Whisky Association took the Scottish Government to court to try to prevent the policy, arguing that it was trade restrictive and would damage the economy. After the measure was introduced, after a 6-year battle in the courts and millions of pounds of taxpayer money spent, no such economic damage played out, and the policy has successfully reduced alcohol deaths. The Scotch Whisky Association also lobbies for alcohol duty to be cut or frozen each year, arguing it would be good for the economy to support the alcohol industry. Cuts and freezes to duty between 2012 and 2019 led to an additional 2,000 deaths from alcohol in the UK as alcohol became increasingly affordable. Alcohol control policies do aim to reduce population-level alcohol consumption, and a reduction in drinking could well affect the economy. However, research shows that reducing alcohol harm can support economic growth. For example, any reduction in spending on alcohol due to increased taxation would partly be offset by increased spending on other products. Research from the Fraser-Ravalandra Institute showed that a 10% increase in UK alcohol taxes, which would reduce alcohol consumption, could then be invested in other sectors and public services, and had the potential to increase national income by £850 million and increase employment by 17,000 jobs.
We then need to layer in the supply side labour market effects of reduction in alcohol consumption. So the health gains from lower alcohol consumption would then feed through to the economy in the shape of fewer people coming to work hungover and having their productivity impaired as a result, fewer people being off sick because of the health harms associated with alcohol, fewer people being unemployed because their drinking makes it harder for them to hold down a job, and ultimately fewer people of working age dying because of alcohol-related causes. And all of those things are an unambiguous gain to the economy. I mean, they're obviously good for other reasons. They're probably more important, frankly, than the economy, but they are unambiguously good for the economy.
For decades, the alcohol industry has engaged in the funding of research in order to shape perceptions and spread doubt. Industry funding of research allows them to shape the research agenda and focus on industry framing of problems, such as focusing on individual issues and interventions. It also may pressurise researchers to produce findings that are beneficial to their funders. As recently as 2018, a major study on alcohol and cardiovascular health had to be cancelled after evidence was found of pro-industry bias in the awarding of the grant, the selection of the investigators, and the choice of research sites. The industry shapes the evidence base through sponsored research, selective research dissemination, and the discrediting of public health research. It also muddies and confuses public understanding of alcohol harms and pushes for ineffective policy measures.
The alcohol industry has funded scientific research for decades. It has tended to focus on early career researchers. So what we find is that small amounts of funding at the early stage of a career leads to perhaps more industry funding, more work with other industry funded researchers, and attendance at industry funded events. And so it has an influence over the whole course of a person's career.
The alcohol industry has for many years used similar tactics to those of the tobacco industry during the 1950s. This is referred to as the tobacco industry playbook, and was a tactic the industry used to promote their product and spread misinformation about its health effects.
And so the tobacco industry engaged in practices that promoted denial of the harms of smoking, promoted doubt about the health harms associated with smoking, and criticised science that went against commercial interests and identified the harms of cigarette smoking. And today we're seeing that not only the alcohol industry but also other industries such as gambling or the ultra-processed food industries, the oil industry, are also using some of these same tactics, which massively impact on public health.
If the industry hasn't managed to resist regulation by pushing the economic argument or by shaping perceptions through research, they position themselves as part of the solution by promoting self-regulation, partnerships with the government, and voluntary agreements. In the UK, this includes marketing and labelling. The industry-funded Portman Group is responsible for overseeing a marketing code of practice, which includes forbidding marketing material which may be appealing to children. However, analysis shows that these restrictions regularly fail to restrain marketers and do not protect vulnerable people from harmful alcohol marketing.
So the point of self-regulation and voluntary industry measures is to allow the industry to say to policymakers that, look, we're keeping our own house in order. You don't have to be too concerned about alcohol harms because we're doing all these great things. Look at all the activities we're engaged in. We fund charities, we engage in measures like the community alcohol partnerships, We're doing work in schools, although I think they sometimes like to keep quite quiet about that one, because I don't think the public would be too impressed to know that the alcohol industry is teaching school children about alcohol and giving them this information.
The UK government's Public Health Responsibility Deal, launched in 2011, is a clear example of the failure of industry partnerships to improve public health. The deal, which aimed to tap into the potential for businesses and other organisations to improve public health and tackle health inequalities, allowed alcohol industry groups to dictate a series of public health pledges and communicate the results too. One of the pledges was to improve product labelling to help inform consumers. However, despite the Chief Medical Officer's drinking guidelines being updated in 2016, 6 years later, research by the Alcohol Health Alliance found a third of products still do not include the guidelines on labels. This relinquishing of control has allowed the alcohol industry, an industry that manufactures a product that kills over 20,000 people in the UK each year, to have a direct say in health policy, and the opportunity to misinform and spread doubt among politicians and the public. The alcohol industry exists to produce and sell alcoholic drinks, and make a profit in the process. It is somewhat unsurprising, therefore, that their objectives are not focused on improving public health, and that their lobbying of government and framing of information does not improve the health of the country. However, much of their lobbying activity goes much further than this, as it directly prevents or slows the implementation of evidence-based measures that would reduce deaths from alcohol. Therefore, there is clear rationale for the industry to be excluded from the development of public policy, particularly health-related policy. For more information on this topic, check out the briefings on our website.